Hi everyone, this is Mona. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is day 1 of 4 for IMA for beginners. We will be recording today's webinar for your convenience. Later today I'll send out the video link as well as the PowerPoint to those who are attending today's webinar. So if you could, to get started, I would like for you to test out the chat feature. If you can hear me and you can see the presentation, one second. If you could please put your phone or your mic on mute, that would be great. There was quite a bit of background noise there. So if you could test out the chat feature, if you can hear me and see the presentation, please type the following information: your location, your store format, Sears, Kmart, or both, and your flow type. For example, DC, DSD, or JIT. As an example, Antioch, Illinois, Sears, DC, and DSD. You could go ahead and test out your chat feature. That would be great. We'll come back to this in just a moment. Just some housekeeping to go over with webinar etiquette. Please put your phone on mute when you are not speaking. If you are not listening to the audio directly, if you are listening to the audio directly from your computer instead of calling in, be sure to mute your computer's microphone. This helps to minimize background noise for all participants. You can access your computer's microphone options by going to Control Panel, Sound, Recording tab. Again, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking, because if there's too much background noise, I will have to mute everybody, which makes it a bit difficult in case someone wants to ask a question audibly. So please mute your phones and phones and microphones. Please wait to audibly ask questions until designated times. I will have those times throughout the presentation. You'll see this blue bubbly background with the question mark. There's an example on the screen. Please keep questions on topic and minimal. But please feel free to submit questions at any time in the presentation via the chat. I asked you to test out the chat feature at the beginning, so we're going to take a look at that. We have Kent, Washington, Sears, DC, Minneapolis, Minnesota, both Sears and Kmart, DC, Kansas City, Missouri, both in DC, Walled Lake, Michigan, Kmart, Louisville, Kentucky, JS Products. I'm actually from Kentucky, so nice to see you. We have Jupiter, Florida, both RRC, New York, both. Okay, so that gives me a good understanding of the different formats that I'm working with today. It also gives you a chance to try out the chat feature so that you can utilize that during the presentation. I'm going to do my best to answer any questions that you have. However, I know that there's probably going to be some questions that I will not be able to answer. So if I'm not able to provide a proper answer to your question, or if I miss it in the chat, if there's too many questions coming in, or because I have two computers set up so I can go back and forth and monitor the chat. If I happen to miss something, please email to vendoruniversity@searshc.com, and I will do everything I can to try to get an answer to your question. If it's not something that I know, I will find out who does know it. I do see that we have someone from Guam. So just so that you know, the IMA for Beginners is designed most specifically for domestic vendors. So if you are an import vendor, some of this may or may not be applicable to you. So I just want to give you a heads up on that, since I do see someone is from. Okay, we're going to get going. Real quick, since you're going to be hearing me a lot over the next 4 days, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Mona. I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager for the Vendor and Item Support Team. I own a cat named Tofu and a blind dog named Chloe. I have 3 adorable nephews there in the center that you see. Also, I love to travel. I think that picture was taken in Slovenia last year. Like I said, this is day 1 of 4. Today we're going to be covering IMA Basics and Terminology. Tomorrow we're actually going to be walking through the new item grid setup. On Wednesday we're going to be talking about some different IMA features. It's really kind of a wide range of features offered in IMA, such as quick search, the changes tab, changes listing items, general task list. You have a few different task lists you might need to pay attention to. So we're going to cover all that in day 3. In day 4, we're going to go over some maintenance in IMA, just some of the most common maintenance updates that you may need to do. So today we're going to talk about IMA terminology, the workflow process of an item, and vendor role ownership. So first off, what is IMA? IMA is basically a big data catalog or library of information of anything that is sold at our stores. If it's going to be sold in Kmart or Sears, it has to be built in IMA. It is a role-based application, and so there are different roles within IMA, vendor role being the first one, and each role is responsible for specific information, and it tends to go through in a very linear fashion, passed from role to role. We're going to talk more about roles in a little bit. So IMA is not the order creation system. It does not feed all of our downstream systems. We have a lot of systems here at SHC, especially depending on whether it's Sears or Kmart, allocation or REM, IDRP, CMA. There's a plethora of applications that are utilized, and IMA does not feed all of the downstream applications. So it's just something to be aware of. There are several methods of entry. For our vendors, we do require data catalog. If you are brand new, you actually have to get set up with a data catalog provider and send over some items initially before you'll be given access to IMA. As a reminder, if you could please mute your microphones, that would be great. It really helps to minimize the background noise because there's some coming through right now. Some of our other methods of entry, we do have a spreadsheet upload and CMA and manual for our internal users, merchants, and inventory. If an item is exclusively online, a lot of times that gets started in Spin, and then Spin backfeeds into IMA. So there's a lot of different information that gets put into IMA, and we're going to be discussing this as we move along today. But first off, I want to try to explain some key terminology. So if you have an item, such as, let's say, a water bottle, a nice water bottle, not one of the plastic disposable ones, but one that's reusable. If you were to build that in the system, it also has several pieces or components to it as it gets built. So you may refer to the water bottle as an item, a general piece of merchandise. But one of those pieces is also referred to as item. So that's good to be aware of because we do have a lot of terminology where there are multiple words that mean the same things, or multiple words that mean the same things, or one word that can mean multiple things. So in this case, item could be referring to the general piece of merchandise, or it could be referring to that specific component of the item. Also, if you're on the Sears side, there's something called a core item. And if you're working with your merchant team or your buying team, they will sometimes be referring to an item number, but they really mean the core item number. So that's just good to be aware of so that you can help to minimize confusion. If they're referring to an item number and something just isn't making sense, ask them to clarify if they mean the core item number. So some of the other components or pieces of an item, you have the item, you have the KSN, you have the packages, the vendor packs, and core item for those Sears items. Now each of those components or pieces have a tab in IMA. And on each of those tabs, there is information specific to each of those components. So first we're going to talk about the item. An item describes the business unit that your product is assigned to. So it identifies the division, category, and the subcategory. That's the SHC hierarchy. Now you may, if you're on the Sears side, you may also hear them refer to a Sears hierarchy or a Sears division. Not to cause confusion, but a lot of times those divisions between the SHC hierarchy and the Sears hierarchy are different. Sometimes they can be the same, but usually they're different numbers. An item shares the same store location. It also shares the same selling price or retail price. It's a 9-digit number. You'll find that it's usually identical to the KSN number, especially for Sears items. if it's a Kmart item, it's possible that the item number could be different from the KSN number due to an inventory function called linking. Now I do want to just give a quick call out for linking because some vendors get confused by that term, and basically in their minds, linking means something different than it means to an inventory analyst in IMA. So for an inventory analyst in IMA, if an item is linked, it actually physically takes the place of that in the store. They share the same exact location, even though they have different KSNs. Sometimes on the vendor side, they try to think in terms of linking as far as putting multiple UPCs on the same item, but that is not the correct terminology. So I wanted to call that to your attention because it can get kind of confusing when vendors are emailing the help desk and asking for help with linking because it is an If you have any questions about linking, I would definitely speak to your inventory analyst because that is a function that is owned by them. So as an example, we have our water bottle. It has an item number, and for the division, it's sporting goods, category accessories, subcategory water bottles. So that's the SHC hierarchy, the division, category, and subcategory. That also describes where in the store this water bottle is located. So we know it's going to be located in the sporting goods department. We know it's going to be located with all of the accessories, with all of the other water bottles. So that's the SHC hierarchy. Now there's several item types that you might build. The two most common item types that you most likely build are typicals and exploding assortments. So again, we have multiple terms for the same thing. A typical can also be referred to as an each. It can also be referred to as a member. And basically, it's what is actually being sold at the register. It's what's being rung up at the register. So in this example, we have a 6-pack of soda because it's actually sold as a 6-pack. We have a bottle of shampoo or a single shirt. Now, an exploding assortment is also known as an excess. And it is, an assortment of items. So for apparel, it could be an assortment of the same shirt with sizes small through extra large. Or for, let's say, batteries, it might be an assortment of AA's, AAA's, D's, and C batteries. Another reference to the terminology for these items, you might hear them referred to as parent and child, with the exploding assortment being the parent, and then the child being the typicals, because all of the typicals are part of the exploding assortment. Now, some of the additional item types that could be created, we have a supply fixture. If we're going to order a supply fixture, we have to actually have it built in the system so we can order it. The class control item, the best example of this are curtains. Because with curtains, you have a very large variance in the number of the length and the width of the curtains. So instead of creating a different item number or a different item for every single possibility, they create it as a class control item. Also supply items, so paper towels, cleaning supplies, the bags that go at the registers, those are all supply items. And then finally, installation agreements and protection agreements. So if you work with, let's say, large appliances like washers and dryers or refrigerators, those always have an installation agreement and protection agreement offered. And you will see them as flags on those items, but those agreements also have to be built as actual items in our system so that they can be rung up at the registers. So those are all the different item types you could be building, but again, most likely you are building typicals and exploding assortment. So vendor relevant fields for item. You have the item type, you have the SHC hierarchy, the division, category, and subcategory. You have your EAS tag required indicator, and your default selling price. Which the default selling price, usually it's not actually required. If you get a hard error for not entering it, you can go ahead and enter something. But this is typically updated by the merchant, just so you are aware. Whatever you enter, if you're, if you always try to be exact on the MSRP, you don't need to worry about it so much because we never sell items for the MSRP, and it's always going to be updated in a later roll. So this is what the item tab looks like. If you were to do a quick search for an item and click item tab at the top, up here you can see this is your item type, typical, and then in the box you have your SHC hierarchy. Below that you have your EAS tag required indicator. Now some of you may know what this is and some of you may not. Basically, think of, with a lot of clothing stores, they have the security tags on clothing so that if someone tries to leave and the security tag is on, it's gonna, the alarm will sound. That's the EAS tag. You may also find that in expensive tool items, like if you have an expensive drill that you're selling, it might have an EAS tag. But this field is located both on this item tab as well as the vendor pack tab. And if EAS tags are something that you use in your business, just be aware it is located on both of those fields and they should match. And then finally, over here on the right, if you want to look at it, this is the default selling price. But again, this is usually updated by the merchant once it passes through the vendor roll. So any questions so far on the item tab?
I have a question.
Okay.
Is the item tab, is that brand new? Because it doesn't look like something that I filled out like a couple months ago.
No, the item tab is not brand new. It's been around for as long as I've been here. And
were there updates to it?
No, most likely were you using the new item grid, right?
Yeah, like when you select typical, you know what, maybe I just added eaches on to everything that was already there. Because I came in like not starting from scratch on items that I was doing.
Yeah, if the item was already existing,
yes,
you may have just been creating the eaches and the vendor packs.
Okay, that's probably what it was, because that doesn't look familiar to me. Okay.
Yeah, but the item tab was still there. Like, you could have clicked it and you could have looked at it. But if you were just adding eaches and vendor packs to existing items, it wouldn't be necessary to go to the item tab.
Okay.
So also, if you're working with the new item grid, which all of you should be, which we're going to be talking about tomorrow, it looks very different. The screenshots that I'm showing you are if you do a quick search for an item and then you click the tab to view the information. So when we're in the new item grid, it's all still sectioned out in the tabs, or you can work, there's a few different views that you can use in the new item grid, and we're going to go over all those tomorrow.
Okay, great.
So any other questions about the item tab? Okay, so we're going to move on to the KSN tab. So KSN stands for Key Stock Number, and it's basically a 9-digit number. It's randomly created by IMA during the initial creation process. And officially it has that dash and the check digit at the end. We do require that at the store level for items to ring up properly, but you'll find that a lot of our internal systems don't require that dash and check digit. You actually have to omit it in a lot of cases. So for instance, if you were to do a quick search for a KSN, you would have to leave off that -7. Otherwise, it's not going to come back with any search results. So the KSN may identify the style, size, color, fabric, or information on the strategies. So some of your buying teams, you may have worked out your item set up differently from other businesses. There are set fields that are required by vendors, by the system, but some businesses have worked stuff out with their vendor where they also may input some attributes. An example for this would be team apparel. So each of the team items, when they're built, the vendor also adds on attributes to those items because there's so many of them that it's too much to be handled internally. So that would be between you and your buyer if you do add KSN attributes, but it is not system required. So the KSN is used primarily by inventory to monitor sales and order creation. If you remember earlier, I stated that IMA is not the order creation system, but they do use that KSN information, that KSN number, for creating orders and monitoring sales in other systems. And I know as a vendor, you are used to thinking of your item in terms of the G10 or the UPC. But just make a note that here at SHC internally, most buying teams and inventory teams, they think of the item in terms of the KSN, since it's used to track sales and ordering. So I make the same call out to our merchants and our inventory analysts, just so that if there seems to be some miscommunication between you guys on either end, that you're aware that they may be referring to the KSN, and if you think in terms of KSN, it may help clear things up. Whereas on their end, if they try to think of things more in terms of G10s, that may help clear up some of the communication. So I make the call outs to both internal users and external. So there's not really a lot that's relevant to you as a vendor on the KSN tab. You basically have your KSN description and KSN number. So when you sync your items over through data sync, that KSN description will come over and that KSN number gets created automatically. Mostly you just are interested in this for records purposes, especially with reports. But you don't actually have to complete any information on the KSN tab unless you've worked something out with your buying team where you're completing attributes, in which case attributes are located down here at the bottom of the screen. Any questions about the KSN tab? Okay. So we're going to move on to packages. And just as a general reminder, if you could mute your microphones if you aren't speaking, that would be great, just to cut down on the background noise. Thank you so much. All right, so moving on to packages. This is where you do a lot of your information. Packages and vendor packs. So packages contain information on boxes or shipments of products sent to an SHC store. It can identify dimensions and weights, brand, hazard information, country of origin, HTS code, fabric metal content. There's a lot of information that's found on the package tab that's entered by the vendor. So just like there are different item types that you build, there are also different types of packages that you build. You have each packages, you have cartons, you have pallets. First, we're going to talk about the each package. Each packages are kind of the building blocks because each item has to have a corresponding each package, and carton and pallet creation is dependent on each packages. So you have to have those each packages built in order to put anything into your cartons and pallets when you create them. Each packages get the RG10 or the retail marking number or the UPC, the 12-digit number. Whereas cartons get the SG10 or the shipping marking number, also known as I-205 or the G1014 barcode. Now there are several types of cartons. You have in each carton, you have a uniform carton, and you have an exploding assortment carton. Now, each carton and each package are different from each other, so I just want to make a call out for that. But the each carton, uniform carton, exploding assortment carton, those are the three most common types of cartons that are built. You do also have a mixed or assorted carton and a sellable carton. Those are usually very specific to certain businesses, usually to certain businesses on the Kmart side. And those types of cartons cannot be synced over, so the process for creating those is quite different. So in each carton is usually a very large item, like a refrigerator or a bicycle or a washer or dryer, and it's sold in the same carton that it's shipped in. Because it's sold in the same carton that it's shipped in, it has to have both the retail marking number and the shipping marking number. Has to have the shipping marking number, so when it gets delivered to one of our warehouses, We can scan it and see what we're supposed to do with the item. It has to have the retail marking number, or the UPC, so when we sell it at the store, it can be rung up at the register. We also have uniform cartons. And a uniform carton is multiple eaches in specific quantities. So 24 units of a shirt or 12 units of a water bottle. But it's basically the same exact item, multiples of the exact item in a carton. And then the exploding assortment carton, or the excess carton. It's an assortment of items. Here in this example, we have 2 small shirts. We have 4 medium shirts and 4 large shirts. Now each of those shirts have to have their own UPC because they need to be rung up at the register. But then they all go into a carton, and then that carton has a shipping marking number. So here's an example in the system of the package tab for an exploding assortment. Over here on the left, we can see that there are unique KSNs. Each KSN has a unique UPC. And then each UPC has a unique, or has a specific quantity. Mixed and assorted cartons. Do any of you know if you've used mixed and assorted cartons? Okay, so I'm hoping that most of you don't use them because they are a little bit more complicated to set up, and you cannot actually use the new item grid process to set up mixed and assorted cartons. If you do use mixed and assorted cartons, please email me at vendorsuniversity@searshc.com. We're trying to determine additional topics for webinars, and if there's enough of a need on a webinar specifically for building mixed and assorted cartons, that's something that we want to know so we can get that set up. So if that is something that you do build for your business, please email me and let me know. So mixed and assorted cartons have the same cost and selling price. The sales and inventory cannot be tracked for the individual UPCs, which I'm going to explain a little bit clearer in the next couple of slides. And typically, it's Kmart only, or more specifically, allocation. So technically, we do have some Sears items that are shipped via allocation, and they could technically be built as mixed and assorted cartons. It's a bit unusual. So if your buying team asks you to do this, I would just double check and make sure that's what they really want. Mixed and assorted cartons cannot be data synced. This means they have to be built manually one by one. That means the setup time can be longer, especially if there are several cartons that need to be built. So it's something just to be aware of for planning purposes if you're used to using item grid. So for a mixed carton, it's 1 KSN with fixed quantities of multiple UPCs. And an assorted carton is 1 KSN with unknown quantities of multiple UPCs. So for example, with a mixed carton, we have bottles of bubble bath. You have 8 peach, 8 vanilla, and 8 orange. At the inventory level, all we can see is that how many bottles of bubble bath we're selling. We cannot see how many peach, we cannot see how many vanilla, or how many orange, just total bubble bath. We also, we do know that the number that we're getting for each of those scents, but we just don't know how many of each that we're selling. So that's a mixed carton. And in the system, you'll see that there is a single KSN. It's the same KSN all the way down, but there are multiple UPCs on that single KSN. And then over on the right, we can see that there is a specific quantity for each of the UPCs. Now for an assorted carton, this is used a lot in toys. So for example, you have Matchbox cars or beach balls or figurines, like Ninja Turtle figurines. That's going to be my example for today. You have the 4 turtles, you have Splinter and Shredder. So with an assorted carton, we know the total number of UPCs that we're getting, but we don't know how many of each unique UPC we're getting. So we would know that we're getting 20 Ninja Turtle figurines. We have no idea how many Leonardos we're going to get, or Michelangelos, or Shredders. We just know we're getting 20 total. We cannot track the inventory or sales at the individual level. We can only track it at the high level Ninja Turtle figurine level. So it could come down to the end of the season and we have a lot of splinters left over that end up on clearance. But we wouldn't know that we have a lot of splinters left over on clearance unless we physically go into the store and see them. We would only see that we have, a certain number of Ninja Turtle figurines. So that's where the kind of the difference between a sorted carton and a mixed carton, the fact that we don't know, well, we don't know on either side, but we don't know how many we receive initially from the vendor. So in the system, you can see there's a single KSN all the way down, and just like a sorted carton, or sorry, just like the mixed carton, there's multiple UPCs. However, unlike the mixed carton, with an assorted carton, the each quantity is blank, and all we know are the total eaches. So in this example, we know we're going to get a total of 12, but we don't know how many of each of these UPCs we'll be getting to make up the total of 12. Finally, we have the retail carton, also known as the sellable carton. This is really only used for oil and cigarettes as far as I'm aware. But basically the customer can buy the box of oil, or they can open up that box and buy the individual pieces, individual units of oil. Then we have pallets. So there's two different types of pallets. There's a uniform pallet and an exploding assortment pallet. Just like the mixed and assorted cartons, pallets are typically Kmart only, specifically allocation. So again, you could have a Sears item that's allocation that's being built as a pallet. It just doesn't happen very often. Now, this doesn't mean that you cannot ship pallets for Sears. It just means they can't be built in the system as pallets. So if you want to ship a pallet for Sears items, you would just build it as either a uniform carton or an exploding assortment carton, and then when you go to ship it, you just put it on a pallet. So it's really nothing overly complicated. Don't overthink it. So you can ship pallets for Sears. You just can't build them in the system as a pallet. So, and like the mixed and assorted cartons, pallets cannot be data synced over, and they do have to be built manually. So a uniform pallet, it is very similar to a uniform carton. It's just multiples of the same each. So an example for this would be bleach or potting soil. And an exploding assortment pallet is just like an exploding assortment carton. It contains fixed quantities of multiple KSNs. An example would be back-to-school pallets with all the different school supplies, or children's assorted size underwear and t-shirts. So there are a lot of vendor-relevant fields on the Packages tab. You have your package type, you have your retail shipping marking number and format, dimensions and weights, hazardous information, HTS codes, country of origin, fabric metal content, and package configuration. So this is what it looks like on the tab. You have your package type located up here at the top, along with the marking numbers and the marking number format. Down here, these are your dimensions, and then over to the right are your weights. And we are going to talk a little bit more about that after this slide. Below that, you have your hazardous questions. Now, you have to answer these, and please make sure that you're being correct with your answers. If you do not know the answer, please reach out to someone in your company that does. We did have a product set up about a year or two ago that was not set up properly, and it went on an airplane, and it should not have been on an airplane, and it ended up causing a fire. It was propane gas for like camping, and the hazardous questions were not answered correctly, and that allowed it to be on the plane where it should not have been, and it did cause the fire, but it was a pretty big deal. There were a lot of fines involved, a lot of people getting called in on the weekends, and it could have potentially, hurt some people, but thankfully they were able to contain it and get the flight to land. But that's why hazardous questions are so important, that they are correct. Below that, you see your HTS code. Now, some vendors are aware of the HTS codes. Some of them don't really know what HTS codes are. So when the driver comes to pick up your product and he gets it in his truck and he's going along to his next destination, if he were to get stopped by the police for any reason, they might ask him to produce a list of all of the product that's in the back of the truck. So that list is populated by the HTS code that you select in IMA. Now, I know it's hard sometimes to find an exact match for your product, so don't fret over it too much, but just try to find the closest match that you can for your product with the HTS code. But that's what its purpose is for. It creates a list for the driver for him to produce of what's being moved on the truck. Now, below the HTS code, you will see the fabric metal content. This is really only applicable to a few businesses, especially apparel on the fabric side. And you can enter more than one fabric here, but just make sure that it's accurate. Because if we're buying, let's say, 100% Egyptian cotton from you, like sheets, we want to be able to see that in the system when we look at the item. And then over on the far left, you will see country of origin. Now, you can enter more than one country on this, because I've had some vendors where part of their product is built in one country and part of it is built in another. You can add as many countries as you need to be accurate. One thing we do ask, though, if it lists the U.S. and that's the only country that it lists, please double check that it's actually 100% made in the U.S., because there are a lot of customers that really make an effort to only purchase items made in the U.S. So you want to make sure that that's accurate so that it doesn't break down any trust between you and your customers. So looking at a carton package, you have your configuration here. So this is where we can see the KSNs and UPCs and the quantities. And then down here, these are the dimensions and weights for your carton, because those will be different than the dimensions and weights for your eaches. So for dimensions and weights, they must align with GS1 standards on cube measurement. The cube is calculated by the depth times width times height for both the each and the carton level. So for example, we have an item, and the each dimensions are 5 by 4 by 2. So the cube for that single item is 40, and the each weight is 5 pounds. And then here we have an example for a 2-pack in a carton. So if that individual unit, the cube, is 40, then at minimum, the cube sum for that carton has to be 80. It cannot be less than the cube times the quantity. So it also cannot be grossly larger. So if you were to enter measurements and it totaled up to 500, then that would also cause an error. Now the weight has to be exact. There's no reason why the weight shouldn't reflect accurately. You do have, like I said, in this example, there's 2 items in the carton. IMA will sum the each's cube and expect the carton cube to be equal to or greater than the sum. So if you get warnings on your dimensions and weights, warnings can be ignored. That means you're within the allowance. Now if you do get the hard error, which is in red, then that will require for changes to be made. So we care a lot more about the carton dimensions than the each dimensions. So please make sure that your carton dimensions are correct. If you need to kind of update your each dimensions to get them within the rules, the system rules, then that's okay, because the carton dimensions are what we care about. We want to know how much space you're going to take up in the truck. So if we send a truck to you and you're supposed to take up the entire truck and you end up only taking up half of the truck, you could potentially be charged because we could have scheduled additional stops for that truck. Or let's say you were supposed to take up only half of the truck, you ended up taking all of the truck. Well, now that truck is not going to be able to make the additional stops that had been scheduled. So again, the carton dimensions are what's really important for us. So please make sure that your carton dimensions are correct. We do have exemption rules or allowances. So basically, if you have an item that's compressed, stacked, or nested, or if you're sitting a display with the shipper, it can qualify for exemption. So for example, if you have chairs that can be stacked, then that carton, the width and length and height, they're not going to add up properly if you were to take the individual cube and multiply it by the quantity. Another example would be pillows. If you put pillows in a box, most likely you're going to compress those down. So again, the total carton could be less than what the normal cube sum value would be. With weight, there are no exemptions. The carton weight must always align with your each's sum weight. So if exemption rules apply, you can change the dimension exception indicator flag to Y on in-process items. And you only have to do this at the UPC or each level. You do not need to change this flag at the carton level. So we are going to go over how to actually update this during the IMA maintenance session on Thursday. Any questions so far on the Packages tab? Okay. So I know this is a lot of information if you're brand new to IMA, and if you have questions and you don't know what your business does, I encourage you, one, reach out to other people on your team if you're an existing vendor and others have already been working in IMA. Or if that's not the case, reach out directly to your buying team and your inventory team if you don't know what types of cartons you build, you don't know what types of items that you build, and just ask them how it's typically done for your business. So moving on, we're going to talk about the vendor packs tab. An item cannot be ordered without a vendor pack. So you do have to create a vendor pack for each of the items. It identifies a lot of vendor-specific information, order done, flow type, cost, vendor stock number, projected first in-store date, and ship points. In addition to that, you also can see the total eaches per enter, number of enters. You can see your cost and vendor stock number. The EAS tag required indicator that was on the item tab. If you remember, I mentioned it's also located on the vendor pack tab. And you have your California Proposition 65 questions and ship points depending on your flow type. So this is the vendor pack tab. Up here at the very top, you can see your flow type. The flow type for this specific item is DC. Under ownership code, you can see that this is a Sears item. Down below, you can see the cost, your vendor stock number, your description, the EAS tag and required indicator. And then over on the right, you can see your California Prop 65 questions. Now, California Prop 65 questions, they're different from the hazardous questions. They do have to be completed separately. And basically, California has stricter regulations for some of the chemicals and products that are sold in the state of California. And it has certain chemicals in it, I believe PVC. It actually has to have a warning label in the state of California to be sold. Now, depending on your flow type, if you may or may not have this section down at the bottom. This is where you can see your ship points for each of the individual DCs. Now, for example, if you do DSD, which is direct to store, you will not have any ship points because there are no DC locations for DSD. So inners and eaches. So inners are internal cartons within a carton. These may be broken down in a DC, and then the inners shipped to a different store. So in this example, you have your large carton here, and then these are all inners, these smaller cartons, and then these are your eaches. In this case, I think it's Tylenol. So your total eaches would be the total number of Tylenols, and there's 18. Eaches per inner, there's 6 Tylenol going into each inner, and then the number of inners, there's 3 of them. So it'd be 1863. Now, if you don't have inners, you don't work with inners at all, and you always just put your product straight into a carton, then your total eaches is 18. Your eaches per inner is 1 because it's counting each of these Tylenols as an inner now. And the number of inners is 18. So that would be 18, 1, 18 if you do not actually use any inners. So my merchant or inventory analyst has requested that I create a new vendor pack for an existing item. Why would I need to create a new vendor pack? So in this example, your item's operational. They may have already been ordering the item, and then your merchant or inventory analyst has asked that you create another vendor pack for the item. There are several reasons why they might have asked for that. It could be that they would like an additional flow type setup. If they've been ordering it through DC and they want to start ordering it through DSD, that requires a new vendor pack. Or additional store format. If your item has been selling in Kmart and they want to start selling it in Sears, then it would need a new vendor pack. If it's a different vendor, and there's a couple of different instances for this. So with the disposable water bottles that comes in the big cartons, we cannot get enough supply from a single vendor. So we actually have that up with multiple vendors across the country. So each of those vendors have to have their own vendor pack on that same item. Another example would be if vendor A has been supplying a product and they're going to stop supplying it, but vendor B is going to come in and pick up that same exact product, then vendor B would need their own vendor pack on that item. Another reason why you might need a new vendor pack, if you're going to have a change in a carton configuration. So and this could be if you don't have a new eater member, you can still have a different carton configuration that they want to order, and you would have to have a new vendor pack to go with that new carton configuration. Now, if you have a new eater member, then you're also going to have a new carton configuration, and so that new carton as well as the new each would both need a new vendor pack. And then finally, if there's more than one cost, this is usually only possible with import items, or sorry, not import items, offshore items. So if an item has been sold in the 48 continental states and we want to start selling it in Puerto Rico or Alaska, most likely we're going to be getting that at a different cost. So that would be an instance where you have more than one account. So any questions about vendor packs? Okay, so we'll move on to core item. Now remember, you can use the chat feature at any time to submit a question if you don't want to speak up. I am here to try to help you with any of the questions that you may have. So moving on to core item. This is used on the Sears side. It's required for all items going through a Sears point of sale. Now before Sears and Kmart came together, Sears had a system called Core, and it is basically the legacy system for item setup on the Sears side. So when SHC and Sears combined, they didn't get rid of it. It's still there. It's still being used. But they did create IMA to kind of consolidate item setup into one system. And there is a core item tab within IMA specifically for Sears items. So whenever the item is going operational, before it becomes operational, all of the information from that core tab gets pushed out to the core legacy system. So information on the core tab feeds into the core system. The core item number consists of the Sears division and the 4 or 5 digit item number. Now the Sears division has to be 3 digits, so if it doesn't have the 0 in front, then you have to add the zeros, and then it's a dash, and then the 4 or 5 digit item number. It's used primarily for inventory, sales, and ordering, just like the KSN is used for that on the Kmart side. And a core item number identifies the Sears hierarchy. It can also identify the size and color if that's applicable. So for the vendor, the core item does not get created until the merchant roll. So you don't actually do anything actually on the core item. However, the core div and item number, and if it's skewed, the core SKU, is something that you need to know for your items with ticketing. Because it has to be ticketed correctly, or the item may not ring at the register correctly. And if it gets to a store and it gets out on the floor and it doesn't have the right core item number on that, then we actually have to pull it from the floor. And it's a 7 to 10 day process to correct in IMA because of the kind of the disconnect between IMA and core, how it has to export the information to core. So it does take a while to correct. So be sure that you use the item number and SKUs provided by your buying team. And if you have a question about it or you're not sure if it's correct, go ahead and reach out to them just for confirmation because it can delay items being sold. Any questions about the core item tab? Okay, we're going to move on to workflow and ownership. And I see we have 8 minutes left, so I'll try to get through this timely. So normally I actually have a video for this, but I can't show it through the webinar because there's a bit of a delay and it doesn't play properly. So I have it broken down into screens for you. It starts off with the vendor role. Vendors initiate the item setup in IMA. They utilize data sync provider to sync information to IMA and then work it through a new item grid. That's the typical setup. There are some exceptions to that. From the vendor, I got tongue-tied. From the vendor role, it goes to the merchant role. The merchant validates some vendor entries and add merchant-specific fields, such as retail price, core item number, planning ID, and attributes. From there, it goes to the inventory analyst role. They will update the tier group if that's needed. They validate some other vital information. They add season codes and reorder instructions. And then from there, it goes through the supply chain role. And that role validates that it's being shipped to the most cost-effective DC tier for DC items. And for the most part, those 4 roles are the manual roles in IMA. The supply chain role is only partially manual. If there's something that causes the system to flag an item, such as it's a small carton, but it weighs 60 pounds, something like that would cause the system to flag that item and to actually be reviewed by a person. So once you get past those 4 roles, we have the system automated roles. You have hold state, where a set of checks is run on the items, and items wait to update the open item database system. And then finally, we have bridging. Bridging is where a second set of checks is run on the item. The information moves to the open item database. And for Sears items, it gets exported to core. And for Kmart items, they should not spend very long in bridging. For Sears items, they can spend a while in the bridging role, maybe even overnight at times. For hold state, your item will probably be in hold state for a few hours. Could be overnight, depending on how busy the system is. Now, if your item is in hold state for longer than a day, please reach out to IMA Help at SearsHC.com because there is a reason it's still stuck in hold state if it's there for a full day. So once it gets to a hold state and bridging roles, an item becomes operational and it can be ordered through our ordering systems. So when I send out the PowerPoint, you'll have access to this link where if you want to, you can go view the video for the workflow process. Also, vendor field responsibilities. Now these are just the system required responsibilities. As I mentioned, you may have spoken with your merchants or your buying teams and have something worked out where you add attributes or maybe some other fields, especially if you're using the NIU buy sheet or the HLN upload buy sheet. They may have you complete some information on there. But as far as the system required fields, these are the system required fields for vendors. So any questions on workflow row ownership or any questions at all, period? So if you think of a question later today or you have a question that you'd like to see answered later this week, please go ahead and email me at vendoruniversity@searshc.com, especially if it's something you'd like to see answered with one of the other sessions this week. That way it gives me some time to kind of research if I need to, so I can give you a full complete answer. But I do want to help you get answers to any questions you may have. I will stay on the line for about 5 minutes in case anyone has some questions that they want to ask after people start signing off. Otherwise, have a great day. Okay.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
You know, the data synchronization with WorldSync, where do I find that in the IMA? You said it was uploaded a long time ago. I just got into IMA. They just gave me access recently.
Okay, so you did sync items over?
Yes.
Okay. So that's something we're actually going to go over tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah. Tomorrow we're actually going to talk about accessing the items that were synced over and working them through the new item grid. So hopefully tomorrow should answer all those questions for you.
I don't want to play around too much and mess up anything.
Okay. So I will be on the line for about another 5 minutes, but otherwise I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.